Friends, if you are looking forward to an action-packed and thrilling experience, then you will definitely want to know everything about the movie Relay 2024 in English. And if you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe so that you can always stay updated with the latest news about movies like this. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to explore is called Relay 2024, and there is so much to talk about. We will not just introduce the film to you, but we will go into detail about what makes this movie special, where you can watch it, and why audiences are so excited about it. I am going to walk you through everything, starting from the platforms where it will be available, whether on OTT services or on satellite channels, so you know exactly where and how you can watch this movie. We will then take a deep dive into the technical department, looking at how the movie was crafted behind the scenes, what went into the camera work, the visual style, and the sound design that all come together to create the atmosphere of the film. We will also talk about the music department, because as you know, background scores and soundtracks play a huge role in building the mood and intensity of any story, and Relay 2024 is no different. From there, we will move into pre-production, where all the planning and scripting began, then onto the filming stage, discussing the locations used and the challenges faced during shooting. After that, we will talk about the post-production stage, where editing, sound mixing, and visual effects really shaped the final version of the movie. Alongside this, we'll take a look at the budget of the film and how much was invested in bringing this vision to life, and then we will also cover its box office collection and how audiences responded when it released. Of course, we cannot forget the story of the movie itself. I will give you a short and entertaining review of the storyline so you can get a taste of what to expect without spoiling too much. We will discuss the main plot, the themes it touches on, and how it keeps you hooked from start to finish. After that, we'll go into the facts about the movie that many people might not know, behind-the-scenes details that make it even more interesting for fans. Another important part of this video will be about the star cast. We'll talk about who the lead actors are, which characters they play, and how their performances bring the story to life. I will share with you how each actor fits into their role, what kind of energy they bring on screen, and how the chemistry between the cast adds to the impact of the story. By the end of this video, you will have a full picture of Relay 2024, its making, its story, its performances, and its success. That is why I ask you to watch this video till the end, because it is packed with information, fun insights, and everything you need to know before watching the movie yourself. So, let's not wait any longer, friends. Let's start the video and dive into the world of Relay 2024. Relay doesn't just tell a story, it builds an atmosphere where every whisper, every pause, and every coded interaction feels like a clue to something larger. The narrative begins in a deceptively quiet fashion, introducing us to Ash, a man whose life is a carefully constructed system of rules. He operates in the shadows as a fixer, a middleman who arranges secret payouts to make problems disappear, but he does so without ever allowing himself to be directly seen or heard. His lifeline is the relay system, a channel that allows him to conduct conversations through intermediaries, and that device becomes both a shield and a mirror. It shields him from exposure, but it also reflects his deep-seated fear of stepping outside the invisible walls he has built around himself. This is the lens through which the story slowly takes shape, inviting the audience to pay close attention to his rituals and routines before the real storm arrives. Sarah enters the picture like a sudden crack in the system. A researcher who finds herself caught in a web of corporate wrongdoing, she stumbles onto evidence that is not only damaging but life-threatening if revealed to the wrong people. Her decision to reach out through the relay service is the spark that ignites the narrative. On paper, she should be just another case for Ash, another problem to fix and file away, but the way she pleads for protection and the desperation that seeps through her words begins to unravel his carefully managed attachment. This is the film's first major turning point. A man who has sworn to remain unseen and uninvolved must now decide whether to break his code for the sake of a stranger. The story then shifts gears into a thriller that thrives on tension rather than spectacle. New York becomes a battleground of surveillance and silence, a city where back alleys, hotel rooms, and dimly lit offices echo with the weight of decisions that could ruin or save lives. The corporation Sarah threatens to expose sends out enforcers, professionals trained to hunt and intimidate, and their pursuit injects urgency into a story that is otherwise paced with deliberate precision. The action is never gratuitous. Each confrontation feels earned. Each close call feels inevitable, and the cat-and-mouse dynamic keeps the viewer leaning forward, waiting for the next slip or betrayal. At the heart of these external conflicts lies the more subtle internal drama. Ash's devotion to anonymity is not just a professional choice, but a personal obsession, a way of avoiding vulnerability. The arrival of Sarah forces him to see the limits of those rules. Every time he bends his system, answering her directly, meeting in person, intervening on her behalf, the audience feels the weight of those choices. These moments are small on the surface, but in the language of the film, they are earthquakes. Sarah, too, is caught between fear and responsibility. She doesn't want to be a hero, she wants to survive. Yet survival requires confronting the very system that put her in danger, and this conflict adds layers of complexity to her character. The narrative structure stays mostly linear, moving forward with cause and effect clarity, but it experiments in subtle ways. For long stretches, the audience is locked into Ash's perspective, experiencing the world as he does. Muted, mediated, filtered through the relay. Then, as the story widens, we glimpse the other side. The reach of the corporation, the methods of its hunters, the quiet dread that spreads when powerful interests are threatened. This shift is not flashy, but it recalibrates the stakes, making the story feel larger without losing its intimacy. One of the film's greatest strengths is how it uses its thriller mechanics to echo its themes. The relay calls themselves become a metaphor for human connection in a world that thrives on distance and disguise. To communicate through a machine is safe, but it is also cold, and the film leans into the irony that the very tool that keeps Ash alive is also the thing that keeps him from truly living. Each call carries tension, not only because of what might be said, but because of what remains unsaid. Silence becomes a character in its own right, heavy with meaning. As the story builds toward its climax, the tension crescendos not with an explosive revelation, but with the weight of choices. Ash's internal struggle reaches its peak. Will he cling to the safety of rules, or will he risk everything for someone he barely knows? Sarah's path, too, reaches a breaking point, forcing her to decide whether her survival is worth more than the truth she carries. The finale, while stripped of unnecessary flourish, becomes a crucible where both characters must reveal who they truly are when the system they serve begins to collapse around them. Relay's emotional power lies in this simplicity. The turning points are not wild twists, but deeply human moments where characters confront the cost of trust and the fear of exposure. The conflict is as much about morality as it is about survival, and that gives the narrative a weight that lingers long after the credits roll. The atmosphere, built from shadows, whispers, and invisible rules, makes the viewer feel complicit, as though they, too, are part of this delicate network of secrecy. By the end, Relay has woven a story that is both a tightly wound thriller and a quiet meditation on connection, anonymity, and the price of stepping into the light. It doesn't overwhelm with noise or spectacle. Instead, it invites you to listen closely, to notice the pauses, and to recognize how a single decision, made in silence, can change everything. Relay's strength lies in how it refuses to treat its characters as props for a thriller plot. Every major player is written with an inner life that seeps through even when they are saying very little, and this layered writing gives the film its pulse. At the heart of it is Ash, whose very identity is defined by distance. He is the man who lives behind screens and intermediaries, the one who lets machines and protocols speak for him. In the early scenes, his personality is expressed almost entirely through habits. The way he checks and rechecks his equipment, the clipped nature of his speech, his near obsession with following procedure. He feels like someone who has been stripped of spontaneity by necessity, a figure carved out of rules. But what makes Ash fascinating is not the mask itself, it's the cracks that begin to appear. His arc is a gradual erosion of detachment, and the film lingers on these moments so you feel the weight of every slip, The first time he lets a personal note creep into a conversation, the hesitation before he bends one of his sacred rules, the quiet recognition that Sarah is no longer a transaction but a person he cannot ignore. By the end, his growth is not loud or heroic in the conventional sense. It is the transformation of a man choosing exposure over invisibility, connection over detachment, risk over the comfort of rules. Sarah, on the other hand, begins her journey in a state of raw panic. She is not introduced as an idealized whistleblower, but as someone who has stumbled onto evidence that could ruin her life. Her motivations are never presented as purely noble. She is afraid, defensive, even contradictory at times, and that complexity makes her compelling. She wants safety, she wants to protect herself, but there is also a simmering awareness that she holds information bigger than her own survival. Over time, that awareness pushes her from a frightened passenger in Ash's world to an active force who takes decisions that shift the balance of the narrative. Her growth lies in finding agency within fear, learning how to hold on to her own voice even when every power around her is trying to silence it. In the process, Sarah's vulnerability becomes her strength, because the film never treats her terror as weakness, but as a natural response to the stakes she faces. Watching her wrestle with the choice between hiding or exposing the truth gives her arc a moral tension that resonates long after the film ends. The dynamic between Ash and Sarah is the film's core engine. They begin on opposite sides of a wall. He the professional mediator who insists on distance, she the desperate outsider pleading for help. At first their exchanges are clinical, stripped of intimacy by the mechanics of the relay system. But slowly, moment by moment, they build a bond not through grand gestures, but through incremental acts of trust. Ash bending a rule to protect her. Sarah resisting the urge to flee and instead choosing to share her evidence. What starts as a cold transaction evolves into an unspoken partnership, and the beauty lies in how understated it is. The chemistry doesn't rely on romantic suggestion or easy banter. It grows from mutual recognition that they are both trapped by systems bigger than themselves, and that survival depends on allowing someone else to see you, even just for a moment. Their relationship shapes the entire emotional architecture of the story. Every choice they make is a ripple that forces the other to respond, and together they create a narrative rhythm built on trust, betrayal, and fragile solidarity. Supporting characters, though less in focus, are also carefully sketched to enhance the central arcs. The corporate enforcers are not just faceless antagonists, they embody the chilling efficiency of institutional power. A reminder that the real villain is not an individual, but the machine of profit and secrecy that values silence over lives. The relay operators, too, though they appear briefly, play a symbolic role in showing how human beings can become instruments in larger systems, reduced to voices that pass messages without context. Each minor character mirrors or contrasts the struggles of Ash and Sarah, reinforcing the themes of distance, control, and moral compromise. Motivation drives the story more than spectacle. Ash clings to anonymity because it has shielded him, but the film suggests there is also guilt or shame behind that compulsion, something unresolved that makes him hide not just from others, but from himself. Sarah's motivation is survival, pure and simple, but survival collides with conscience, and that friction fuels her arc together. Their evolving choices, his movement toward openness, her movement toward agency, form the twin pillars that hold up the narrative. Relay communicates much of its character development through behavior and environment rather than explicit dialogue. A half-second pause before Ash answers a call. The way Sarah grips her bag tighter each time she enters a new space, the silent choreography of how they move through rooms together. These choices speak volumes. Even the relay system itself becomes a tool of character building, what they choose to say through intermediaries, what they hold back, what slips through in tone rather than words. These subtle cues make the characters feel real, layered, and alive. What makes their development powerful is the fragility of it all. Growth in Relay is not portrayed as a triumphant, linear climb, but as a series of fragile steps forward that could just as easily fall apart. Ash's empathy is hard-won and tentative, Sarah's courage wavers, but strengthens with every confrontation, and both arcs feel deeply human because they acknowledge fear, doubt, and compromise. The result is a set of characters whose transformations shape the story more than any twist or set piece, grounding the thriller mechanics in human stakes. Their arcs remind us that the greatest suspense doesn't come from whether someone will escape a chase, but from whether they will risk being seen, heard, and changed. Relay is the kind of film that lives and dies on performance because so much of its storytelling is about what isn't said. The actors don't get the luxury of long speeches to explain themselves. Instead, they have to communicate history, emotion, and moral conflict through restraint, silence, and the smallest gestures. This makes every casting choice essential, and it's here that the film finds its greatest strength. Riz Ahmed's work as Ash is a masterclass in minimalism. He plays a man who has built his life on being invisible, and Ahmed leans into that by stripping away anything that feels unnecessary. His voice is controlled, his body language is closed off, and yet you can sense the weight beneath the surface. When he hesitates for just a second longer than he should, or when his eyes dart in a direction that betrays suspicion, the audience feels the crack in his carefully maintained armor. What makes Ahmed's performance so powerful is that the transformation doesn't come in grand gestures, but in subtle changes. Early in the film, every movement is rigid, every choice exact. By the end, his shoulders loosen just slightly, his silences feel different, and his glances towards Sarah carry a depth that wasn't there before. That shift, though small, feels monumental because Ahmed has made us live inside Ash's rigidity for so long that even the smallest change resonates like an earthquake. He's not just playing a fixer, he's embodying the psychology of someone who has lived in hiding and is finally allowing himself to be seen. Lily James, as Sarah, provides the necessary counterbalance to Ahmed's restraint. Where Ash is calculated and withdrawn, Sarah is raw and exposed. James brings a vulnerability that never slips into melodrama. In her earliest scenes, she sells panic not through screaming or exaggeration but through the way her breath catches, how her voice breaks mid-sentence, how she clutches objects as if they're anchors keeping her grounded. This subtlety makes her fear believable, and it earns her later growth. As the film progresses, you can watch her shift gears. The frightened researcher begins making decisions, standing firmer in conversations, taking control of her own survival. James plays this evolution as a series of small victories, and each one feels hard-won. What's impressive is how she avoids turning Sarah into a stock, whistleblower heroine. Instead, she makes her a real, complicated person who is scared, flawed, and often conflicted. Her chemistry with Ahmed is never forced, and it doesn't rely on romantic cues. Instead, it emerges in the way their energies collide, his stillness against her urgency, and gradually align into a partnership built on necessity and fragile trust. Together, Ahmed and James create a dynamic that carries the film's emotional weight. Their scenes often take place in quiet rooms, through phone lines, or under the watch of surveillance, but their performances make these moments electric. The tension doesn't come from explosive dialogue, but from watching two people test the limits of trust in an environment designed to suppress it. The relay system, which filters and distances their conversations, becomes a stage for their acting. James fighting to be heard through mediation, Ahmed deciding how much of himself to reveal. The performances turn what could have been a cold procedural into something deeply human. The supporting cast adds texture and dimension without ever overshadowing the leads. Sam Worthington, playing the corporate enforcer, doesn't reinvent the archetype of the cold, efficient hunter, but he inhabits it with an intimidating presence that feels more institutional than personal. His menace isn't flamboyant. It's methodical, grounded in the chilling normalcy of someone who sees intimidation as just another day's work. The relay operators, though their screen time is brief, leave an impression. Their clipped delivery and mechanical neutrality highlight how systems depersonalize human interaction, and the actors embrace that detachment in a way that makes even mundane exchanges unsettling. Smaller roles, a lawyer fumbling under pressure, a clerk who hesitates during a transaction, Add layers of realism, because each actor treats their moment as vital to the atmosphere of unease. What's striking across the ensemble is the discipline with which everyone performs. Nobody overacts. Nobody tries to steal the scene. The tone of the film demands precision, and the actors deliver it. This makes the rare bursts of emotion hit harder. When Ahmed finally lets his voice rise, or when James lets fear turn into anger, those spikes of intensity jolt the audience because they break the film's otherwise quiet rhythm. The payoff comes from the restraint, and it's a testament to the cast's commitment that those moments feel both surprising and inevitable. Performance in Relay isn't about charisma or spectacle. It's about control, release, and the art of letting silence speak. Ahmed anchors the story with a performance so restrained it borders on invisible until it suddenly isn't. James builds a character who earns her strength moment by moment, making her evolution compelling and believable. The supporting cast reinforces the themes of dehumanization and systemic power by embracing roles that embody machinery rather than personality. Together, they create a tapestry of performances that elevate the film, proving that sometimes the quietest acting leaves the loudest impression. The director's hand in shaping Relay is one of those subtle but commanding presences that you only fully appreciate once the credits roll and you realize how meticulously everything was orchestrated to achieve not just suspense, but a textured emotional resonance. From the beginning, he rejects the easy temptation of turning the story into a high-octane cat-and-mouse chase. Instead, he leans into stillness, silence, and process, building a mood that feels slow-burning but unshakable, like a pressure cooker that never hisses until the exact moment it needs to. The tone is carefully balanced between thriller and character drama, so that no matter how tense the scenario gets, you are always aware of the emotional undercurrents shaping every decision. What makes this stand out is how consistent the tonal architecture is. The director refuses to break immersion with cheap jump scares or unnecessary action spikes, and instead doubles down on atmosphere, texture, and rhythm. Shot composition becomes the most direct tool for storytelling. Rarely are characters framed in the center of the image with clarity and openness. More often they are positioned slightly off balance, pushed to the margins, or observed through layers of glass, mesh, or architecture. This choice doesn't just look stylish. It's thematic, reinforcing the film's obsession with mediation, surveillance, and distance. In one particularly telling sequence, a conversation unfolds between Ash and Sarah, where the camera lingers on their reflections in a window pane instead of their actual faces, forcing the audience to experience the exchange through distortion, as if we too are part of the relay system that always scrambles reality. This visual language is consistent throughout. Barriers and frames become recurring symbols of disconnection, and the director uses them to trap characters in compositions that mirror the institutional cages they're fighting against. Pacing is another arena where the director's craftsmanship shines. The first act deliberately lingers on routine, the tapping of keys, the cadence of relay messages, the endless bureaucracy of procedure, so that by the time something disrupts that cycle, the audience feels the shock as if their own ritual has been broken. In the second act, the rhythm accelerates, not through louder or busier action, but through tighter intercuts, layering multiple threads so that the procedural machinery of the world and the fragile human connection at its center start colliding in real time. By the third act, the film hits a flow that feels both inevitable and breathless. Every beat snaps into place, but the director still allows micropauses between lines, as though daring the viewer to anticipate what comes next. This constant play with tempo keeps the film alive, turning the experience into an ebb and flow of pressure rather than a monotonous sprint. The auditory design under the director's guidance is equally precise. He understands the power of negative space, so silence is wielded like a weapon, forcing the audience to lean in and listen harder. The mechanical clicking of the relay system is amplified until it becomes a kind of score in itself, a percussive beat that drives the action as much as any music could. When the actual score appears, it's not overbearing or manipulative, it's restrained, often little more than a droning undertone or a pulse that mimics a heartbeat. This choice keeps viewers tethered to the characters' interior states rather than yanking them around emotionally. The contrast between the sterile corporate sounds of the system and the fragile imperfections of human voices, hesitation, breath, tremor, becomes a sonic metaphor for the entire story, and the director is meticulous about how often he lets those moments bleed through. Performance direction is perhaps the most quietly impressive part of the film. Rather than pushing his actors to perform in broad strokes, the director leans into restraint, guiding them towards small, nearly invisible choices that land with tremendous force when the camera catches them. He allows silences to breathe so actors can communicate entire emotional arcs with a single eye movement or a hesitation before pressing a button. Blocking is also weaponized. Who moves toward whom, who stays seated, who breaks a gaze. All of these are choreographed to reveal power, fear, and trust without a single line of exposition. In this way, the director uses the camera almost like a microscope, magnifying the smallest cracks in the characters' facades until they feel seismic. The director's use of recurring motifs adds another layer of cohesion. The relay machine itself is not just a narrative device, but a stylistic anchor. Its rhythms inform editing patterns, its logic influences dialogue cadence, and its physical presence dominates the mise-en-scene. Mirrors, reflections, and doubled images recur throughout, visually reinforcing the story's themes of mediation and concealment. Even hands become a recurring visual focus. The camera often isolates fingers typing, gripping, trembling, reaching, or hesitating, turning ordinary gestures into revelations of character psychology. These touches don't draw attention to themselves in a showy way, but accumulate meaning until the film feels like a fully realized language. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the director's vision is his commitment to consequence. He never frames choices as momentary suspense gimmicks. Instead, each decision is staged to ripple outward, so the audience feels the weight of every compromise or risk. This is why the final act lands so hard. It doesn't surprise by swerving into a twist, but by paying off the slow, careful accumulation of moral and emotional tension. The finale feels less like an ending imposed on the story and more like the natural endpoint of a system that has been spiraling since the opening scene. That level of narrative discipline is rare in thrillers, and it's what makes the director's stamp on Relay so distinctive. In the end, the director shapes Relay into more than a thriller. He turns it into a study of distance, connection, and the machinery that mediates human lives. Through deliberate framing, precise pacing, restrained sound, and layered performances, he crafts a film where tone and mood become inseparable from story, and every stylistic choice is in service of a central vision. It's not simply about keeping the audience entertained, but about immersing them in a world where every frame, every pause, and every silence is heavy with implication. This is direction as orchestration, where the mechanics of cinema and the humanity of character are tuned together like instruments in a score that hums long after the lights come up. Cinematography in Relay speaks in small, deliberate gestures. Angles, light, and framing aren't decorative choices so much as pieces of the story's vocabulary, and once you start reading them, you realize the camera is doing a lot of the talking that characters refuse to utter. The film prefers compositions that emphasize mediation and distance. People are often seen through panes of glass, reflected in half-broken mirrors, or framed by doorways and foreground obstructions, so the image itself constantly reminds you there is always something between you and the truth. That frame within a frame habit works on two levels at once. It creates a visual motif of separation while also giving scenes a layered depth where meaning hides in the spaces between planes. Camera angles lean toward the slightly askew or off-center, which keeps viewers uneasy. Even a simple two-shot rarely places subjects symmetrically because imbalance visually encodes the power dynamics and mistrust at play. Close-ups are used sparingly but surgically. Fingers on a relay keypad, the micro-tremor of a lip, the way eyes flinch before answering. These tight pieces of anatomy are cinematic punctuation, and the cinematographer trusts the lens to hold on them long enough for the audience to do the emotional work. By contrast, wide or long lenses are deployed when the story needs to show systems rather than people, surveillance overheads, Empty corporate atriums, a city grid of streetlights, compressing space so that characters look small and exposed against architecture that feels indifferent. Depth of field becomes a storytelling tool. Shallow focus isolates an individual's interior world while careful focus pulls reveal information. A phone screen coming into sharpness, a face behind a blurred figure. So the eye is guided to discoveries rather than being spoon-fed exposition. Movement is calibrated to mood. Long, steady takes let micro-expressions accumulate weight. A patient push-in can feel like an interrogation. Then, when tension flips into danger, the camera switches to handheld immediacy and tighter coverage that physically disorients and makes the viewer feel pursued. Lighting does equal work. Corporate interiors are often cool and flat, clinical fluorescents that flatten faces and obscure humanity, while personal spaces and night exteriors use practicals, desk lamps, phone screens, neon through blinds, to create pools of warmth and vulnerability. Those small warm highlights become emotional beacons within otherwise antiseptic environments, and when a character steps fully into that light it reads like a moral exposure. Low-key. Chiaroscuro setups show up in the film's chiaroscuro moments, silhouettes blocked against backlight, faces half swallowed by shadow, so secrecy literally sits in the dark and truth struggles to be seen. Color and texture are economical. A muted palette keeps the focus on shape and contrast rather than spectacle, while grain and slight diffusion on night exteriors give the world tactile grit that makes surveillance feel dirty rather than clinical. There are visually striking set pieces that register not because they're flashy, but because they fold the movie's motifs into a single image. A conversation that takes place entirely in reflection, so you're forced to watch doubled identities. A stakeout filmed through rain-slicked glass where neon streaks make the city look like a fever dream. An overhead surveillance sequence that reduces characters to chess pieces on a grid. The cinematography also allies with performance. By holding on faces and letting silence breathe, the camera magnifies restraint into drama, and by choosing camera placement carefully, the filmmakers make privacy feel fragile. Who the lens chooses to ignore or follow tells you about alliances and threat. Finally, the camera work mirrors the film's themes of mediated communication and being watched. Shots that mimic CCTV framing, edits that stitch relay room monitors into a tapestry, and compositions that repeatedly place intermediaries between interlocutors all make the viewer experience the same obfuscation and claustrophobia the characters live with. The result is not just pretty pictures, but a visual logic where tension is manufactured by negative space, where beauty emerges from restraint, and where every angle, pull focus, and shadowed frame is another turn of the story's key. Editing in Relay behaves less like a lurching pair of scissors and more like a careful metronome, precise, patient, and occasionally willing to sprint, so the movie feels choreographed rather than chopped. The editor trusts silence as much as sound, which means cuts are often timed to breaths and micro-expressions instead of dialogue beats. That choice turns reaction shots into punctuation, a held frame on a finger hovering above a keypad, a half-second delay before a character answers, or a slow push-in that lets a face register a moral calculation. Those tiny editorial decisions compound, and by the time tension needs to snap, the audience has been conditioned to notice the smallest visual cue. Transitions are handled with craft rather than flashy tricks. Sound bridges stitch relay room chatter into the next scenes so conversations feel like they bleed across spaces. L-cuts and J-cuts keep the emotional continuity intact. We'll hear a call continue as the image shifts to a stakeout, for instance, which makes the world feel connected and dangerous even when characters are physically apart. Match cuts and recurring graphic links. Fingers tapping a keypad matched to a hand punching a security code across two different locations create a visual language that the audience learns to read. Those recurring edits are small rewards. Once the pattern is set, the film uses it to build anticipation and underscore parallel action without spelling things out. Rhythm is the film's secret weapon. The opening act luxuriates in longer takes and deliberate pacing, letting procedures and routines breathe, so the relay system becomes a lived-in reality rather than a mere plot device. That slow tempo does two things. It invests us in the rules the characters follow, and it makes every subsequent break in those rules feel consequential. In the middle act, The cut rate tightens, shorter reaction beats, tighter coverage, cross-cutting between pursuers and pursued, so the sense of pressure ramps up organically. Editing choices here create a sense of simultaneous time. We feel the relay room ticking, the enforcer closing in, the whistleblower making choices, and those strands collide through intercutting that heightens urgency without resorting to frantic montage. When danger arrives, the edits snap into handheld immediacy and quicker coverage, which physically disorients the viewer in the same way the characters are unsettled. Pacing rarely feels accidental. The film intentionally withholds spectacle and instead extends the small, human beats. For viewers who want explosive set pieces every 10 minutes, the pace might feel languid at first, but for those invested in atmosphere, the payoff is cumulative. There are moments where the tempo risks testing patience, extended procedural passages that meticulously show transaction after transaction, but those stretches usually pay off later by making later choices feel earned. Conversely, the finale prioritizes moral consequence over a drawn-out action sequence. Some viewers might read that as a rushed emotional resolution because the plot mechanics are wrapped up through choice rather than protracted confrontation, yet the editing frames those choices in parallel, so the logic behind them reads as a natural culmination of the film's established rhythms. Narratively, the editing practices economy of information. Ellipses and cuts to black are used to skip obvious connective tissue, forcing the audience to supply motivation and consequence, which turns viewing into a participatory act. The editor's refusal to over-explain is tactical. By trimming expository fat and letting images and sounds carry the weight, the film trusts its audience to assemble the narrative puzzle. That economy also sharpens suspense. When you don't see everything, your mind fills in the gaps and often supplies a scarier possibility than anything shown on screen. Editing choices that privilege implication over revelation amplify the film's core theme of mediated truth. What's cut away becomes as meaningful as what remains. Visually, continuity editing is strong. The geography of chases and hideouts feels coherent because the cuts respect spatial logic, so tension isn't undermined by a confusing jump. At the same time, the editor isn't afraid to break classical continuity for effect. Brief jump cuts or rhythmic montages collapse time during sequences of preparation or bureaucratic motion, converting routine into a staccato beat that contrasts brilliantly with more languid scenes. Those editorial shifts are deliberate tempo changes that remind you the film can move both like a clock and like a pulse. Emotionally, the pace controls empathy. By holding on faces and letting silence breathe, the editor gives audiences time to inhabit a character's interior. A scene where Ash hesitates before making a call is stretched just long enough for us to feel the risk with him. A quick-cut interrogation scene, by contrast, gives panic no room to settle. Both editorial approaches serve different emotional outcomes, and the editor toggles between them with skill. The cumulative effect is a film that manipulates emotional economy. Small, prolonged moments create attachment. Brisk, clipped sequences induce anxiety. Finally, the editor's sense of timing makes motifs sing. Repeated editorial refrains, returning to the relay room at key junctions, a recurring cut from a hand to a relay monitor, or the reuse of a particular match cut at turning points, turn the movie into a rhythm game where anticipatory pleasure and tension are both rewards. The result is a flow that feels purposeful. The movie rarely surprises you with a cheap swerve, but it continually changes tempo in ways that keep you alert, invested, and occasionally breathless. The soundtrack and score of Relay operate almost like an unspoken narrator, subtly guiding the audience's emotional engagement while reinforcing the film's procedural and psychological tension. From the opening moments, the auditory design sets the stage. Ambient noises dominate, and the music enters sparingly, letting the hum of computers, the clicking of keys, the subtle echo of footsteps, and the low rumble of ventilation systems establish a tactile, lived-in environment. This approach makes silence itself a narrative tool, where even the faintest sounds, a door sliding, a paper shuffling, a breath caught mid-sentence, become charged with significance. The audience quickly learns that what isn't heard can be as telling as what is, creating a constant undercurrent of anticipation. When the score does appear, It is precise, restrained, and tailored to the narrative. Electronic pulses, minimalist drones, and subtle tonal shifts mirror the film's mechanical world, especially the relay system that drives much of the story. These motifs are never overbearing. Instead, they emphasize rhythm, repetition, and tension. For example, sequences where Ash monitors or transmits sensitive information often feature low-frequency, cyclical tones that reflect the monotony and precision of his work, enhancing suspense in a way that feels organic rather than artificially imposed. This meticulous alignment of sound with narrative action ensures that music doesn't tell the audience how to feel, it amplifies what's already happening on screen. Recurring auditory motifs are an essential storytelling device in Relay. Certain tonal textures are tied to specific characters or actions. A subtle high-pitched electronic hum might signal Sarah's growing anxiety or approaching danger, while a sustained, low-frequency drone might accompany Ash's moral calculations, creating a subconscious connection between sound and narrative tension. These motifs build familiarity over time, allowing viewers to anticipate stakes and consequences even before the visuals confirm them, which makes the storytelling feel immersive and almost instinctual. The repetition of these auditory cues reinforces the film's central themes of surveillance, risk, and mediated communication, turning the score into a psychological as well as emotional instrument. Silence is wielded with equal sophistication. Extended moments without any score allow the audience to focus on micro-expressions, character hesitations, and environmental sounds. A hand hovering above a keypad, a slight pause before answering a call, or a distant hum of machinery becomes more than a prop. It is a heartbeat, a signal, a measure of tension. The careful alternation between sound and silence gives the score its power. When music re-enters, even the subtlest notes are amplified, transforming minor cues into moments of revelation or dread. This rhythmic tension makes the film's quieter moments just as gripping as its more overtly suspenseful scenes. The interplay between music and diegetic sound is another area where the film excels. The composer and sound editors have created a layered environment where the score blends seamlessly with ambient noises. For instance, the clicking of a relay keypad or the distant hum of air conditioning often aligns rhythmically with underlying tonal layers, creating a hypnotic syncopation that reinforces both mood and narrative structure. This integration turns otherwise mundane procedural elements into charged, almost musical sequences, enhancing the audience's engagement without relying on traditional suspense tricks or action cues. In sequences of rising tension, the score often mirrors character psychology. When Ash faces moral or operational dilemmas, sustained low-pitched tones underscore the weight of responsibility, creating a physical sense of pressure in the audience. In moments of vulnerability or emotional revelation, soft, high-frequency motifs accentuate the fragility of human connection, highlighting the stakes without becoming manipulative. Even ambient environmental sounds, rain tapping against windows, distant traffic, faint machinery, are amplified to accentuate isolation and heighten awareness so that the score feels inseparable from the narrative rather than an overlay. The film also uses subtle musical cues to reinforce thematic concerns. Repeated electronic pulses echo the monotony of corporate systems, reflecting the bureaucratic machinery the characters must navigate. Intermittent bursts of discordant tones signify disruption or risk, alerting viewers to changes in dynamics without verbal explanation. The precision of these cues creates an almost subconscious rhythm that aligns audience perception with the characters' mental states, making tension, suspense, and empathy feel earned and visceral. Standout moments in the soundtrack include scenes where music and silence interact to amplify tension. A scene with Ash alone in a relay room uses minimal low-frequency hums punctuated by the occasional key click, stretching a simple action into an almost unbearable, suspenseful beat. A later scene in which Sarah navigates a high-risk environment combines faint drone with environmental noise, creating the sensation that the walls themselves are listening. In both instances, the music doesn't scream danger, but works with the visual and procedural rhythm to make viewers feel exposed, uneasy, and deeply invested. Even during high-intensity sequences, the score avoids overpowering the visuals or performances. The restraint ensures that performances remain the emotional anchor. Music complements, rather than competes with, character choices and micro-behaviors. Every rise and fall in the score is synchronized with emotional beats, narrative turning points, or thematic revelations, producing a layered, multidimensional sensory experience. Ultimately, the soundtrack and score of Relay exemplify subtle craftsmanship. Through recurring motifs, restrained electronic textures, rhythmic integration with diegetic sound, and strategic use of silence, the music becomes a psychological and narrative partner. It amplifies tension, underscores emotional shifts, and reflects the procedural and moral worlds of the characters, all while maintaining an invisible presence that rewards attentive listening. Every pulse, pause, and resonance deepens immersion, turning the auditory experience into a critical element of storytelling that is as precise, methodical, and immersive as the relay system at the heart of the film. Relay operates on multiple layers, and its thematic ambitions run quietly but insistently beneath the surface. On the most obvious level, it's a procedural thriller about communication, trust, and the mechanics of secrecy, but dig a little deeper, and the film becomes a meditation on power, isolation, and the ways human connection is filtered and manipulated through systems. One of the central ideas is the tension between control and vulnerability. Ash and Sarah navigate environments that are rigid, highly structured, and mediated by technology, yet the story continually emphasizes that no matter how precise the machinery, human choices, and the emotions behind them cannot be fully contained. The relay system, while appearing neutral and mechanical, becomes a metaphor for bureaucracy, surveillance, and the structures that shape behavior. Every beep, message, and protocol reminds the audience that in a world dominated by rules, the human element is simultaneously fragile and decisive. Another key theme is isolation versus collaboration. The characters' interactions are often fragmented. Conversations are mediated, surveillance separates them from one another, and physical proximity rarely equates to emotional closeness. The film repeatedly asks how trust can develop in such a mediated world. Through Ash and Sarah, we see the painstaking evolution of a working partnership that must overcome both systemic obstacles and personal hesitations. Their relationship becomes a microcosm for the broader theme. Humans are capable of connection, empathy, and moral choice, even in environments that seem designed to suppress them. The tension between isolation and cooperation is amplified by the cinematography, editing, and sound design, which constantly reinforce distance while highlighting small moments of engagement, making the theme feel lived in rather than didactic. Ethics and moral responsibility are also central. The story doesn't rely on grandiose heroism. Instead, it foregrounds small but significant decisions that ripple outward. Ash's hesitations, Sarah's choices under pressure, and the subtle interventions of supporting characters underscore the notion that morality is rarely absolute. The film continually raises questions. When is breaking a rule justified? When does adherence to procedure become complicity? By structuring tension around these choices, the film transforms procedural beats into philosophical inquiry, prompting the audience to consider the implications of their own decisions in a mediated world. The manipulation of information and perception emerges as another recurring theme. The relay system literally mediates communication, and the narrative constantly demonstrates how context, timing, and partial information shape behavior. This motif extends metaphorically to how individuals perceive each other. Misinterpretation, hesitation, and incomplete knowledge drive conflict as much as external threats. The film structure, cross-cutting between multiple locations and perspectives, reinforces this thematic concern, showing how understanding is always filtered, fragmented, and sometimes deceptive. It asks viewers to reflect on the consequences of acting with partial knowledge, a question that resonates beyond the story into broader societal contexts. Risk and consequence are omnipresent as thematic threads. Every action, no matter how small, carries weight. Even minor procedural decisions, the press of a key, the choice to relay information, have cascading effects that the film tracks meticulously. In doing so, Relay communicates a philosophy that tension and suspense are not merely narrative tools, but reflections of real-world dynamics. The world is interconnected, small choices compound, and responsibility cannot be outsourced to systems or machines. Underlying all of this is a quiet humanism. The film suggests that even in environments dominated by technology, rules, and impersonality, empathy and understanding remain potent forces. Ash and Sarah's small, tentative acts of trust and communication carry enormous narrative and emotional weight, highlighting the endurance of human intuition and moral reasoning even within the strictest frameworks. The story encourages viewers to consider the balance between mechanical order and human unpredictability, showing that the latter is both a source of vulnerability and the means of transcendence. Symbolism and recurring visual motifs reinforce these themes. The relay device itself represents both opportunity and constraint. Reflections and frames underscore mediated perception. Shadows and light reveal what is seen and unseen. These cinematic choices entwine with narrative and character decisions to create a cohesive thematic architecture, ensuring that the film's ideas are communicated through experience rather than exposition. Ultimately, Relay's deeper messages revolve around the interplay between human agency and systemic structures. It explores trust, ethics, perception, and responsibility, showing how individuals navigate environments designed to suppress or manipulate them, and how small acts of connection can carry enormous weight. These themes emerge naturally from the story, cinematography, editing, and sound design, resulting in a layered, thought-provoking experience that lingers long after the immediate tension of the narrative has subsided. The visual effects and CGI in Relay operate with a remarkable subtlety, functioning as an extension of the film's grounded world rather than as flashy spectacle, and this subtlety is one of the key factors that makes the movie feel immersive and cohesive. Right from the opening sequences, the film establishes a tactile, procedural environment. Physical sets, props, and real-world machinery dominate the screen, and CGI is layered in so seamlessly that viewers are rarely aware of its presence. This restraint allows the narrative and characters to remain the focal points while digital enhancements serve to reinforce the world's logic and atmosphere rather than distract from it. Unlike many thrillers that overuse CGI for dramatic effect, Relay's visual effects work quietly, supporting the storytelling and deepening engagement without ever calling attention to themselves. Practical effects are the backbone of the film's visual realism. Scenes involving the relay machinery, communication devices, and other environmental interactions rely heavily on real props and sets. The tactile quality of these elements gives weight and authenticity to the actors' performances. When Ash presses a button, flips a switch, or navigates a confined room, the audience can almost feel the physical resistance of the objects he manipulates. Similarly, sequences involving stunts, minor physical hazards, or interactive environmental elements are executed practically, providing a tangible sense of risk and immediacy. This emphasis on physicality ensures that the characters' actions feel consequential and grounded, making the moments enhanced digitally even more believable. The film's CGI is used judiciously to enhance scale, extend environments, and visualize elements that are impossible or unsafe to achieve on set. Cityscapes, long-distance surveillance views, or sequences showing multiple perspectives of the relay system often rely on subtle digital augmentation. For instance, a shot might begin on a physical set of the relay room, then extend digitally to reveal the broader infrastructure of the network, or simulate surveillance monitors displaying multiple camera feeds in perfect sync. The CGI is carefully matched in lighting, texture, and perspective so that it blends with the physical footage seamlessly. This attention to detail ensures that the digital additions feel natural and believable, maintaining immersion and narrative continuity. What makes the integration particularly effective is the way CGI complements the film's cinematography and framing. Reflections, glass distortions, and layered visual planes are sometimes digitally enhanced to amplify the story's central motifs of surveillance, mediation, and fragmented perception. A single reflection on a window, for example, might be digitally extended to include multiple angles or characters, reinforcing the fragmented flow of information the protagonists must navigate. Similarly, digital enhancements are used to subtly heighten tension. A corridor may be extended, shadows manipulated, or background elements multiplied to create a sense of looming threat. These interventions are invisible at first glance, but deepen the audience's engagement with the spatial and narrative environment. Lighting and texture are meticulously maintained across practical and digital elements. CGI shadows, reflections, and light fall-off are calibrated to match physical lighting, which prevents dissonance between real and augmented imagery. When a character moves between a physical set and a digitally extended environment, the transition feels seamless, preserving the grounded, tense atmosphere. Even during complex sequences that combine multiple layers, such as surveillance feeds, computer interfaces, and long-shot exteriors, the visual effects are integrated so that clarity and narrative coherence are maintained. This careful layering ensures that digital enhancements reinforce rather than compete with the story. The interplay between practical and digital effects also serves to heighten suspense and tension. A single sequence might involve a practical set, controlled lighting, and a physical prop, while subtle CGI extends a corridor, multiplies background figures, or introduces a digitally rendered obstruction. This combination amplifies the stakes and makes environments feel larger, more complex, and more dangerous than they would in a purely physical setup. By layering effects in this way, the filmmakers create immersive tension that is both believable and visually striking, without ever sacrificing the realism that anchors the narrative. CGI also reinforces character perspective and narrative themes. Surveillance sequences, digital readouts, and environmental manipulations are all rendered to reflect the protagonist's point of view. The digital augmentation of monitors, for example, not only provides exposition but immerses the audience in the experience of observing through mediated systems, reinforcing the film's themes of perception, control, and fragmented information. Even the smallest visual cues, subtle digital distortions, simulated lens effects, or composited reflections, serve both aesthetic and narrative functions, making the audience feel the same uncertainty and tension the characters experience. Visual effects are especially impactful in high-stakes moments. Explosions, environmental hazards, or digitally recreated sequences are executed with precision so that they enhance tension rather than dominate it. The emphasis is always on realism and consequence. A digitally enhanced hazard feels dangerous because it interacts believably with the physical set and the actors' performances. This restraint ensures that suspense emerges from narrative stakes rather than flashy digital showmanship, keeping the audience emotionally invested throughout. Even beyond action sequences, subtle digital effects contribute to atmosphere and thematic resonance. Extended reflections, digital layering of backgrounds, or composited environmental details emphasize the film's motifs of mediation, surveillance, and observation. Shadows and reflections are digitally enhanced to underscore the sense of intrusion, isolation, or fragmented perception, making the VFX an integral part of storytelling rather than an embellishment. Every visual choice, whether practical or digital, supports the narrative, reinforces character psychology, and deepens thematic cohesion. Ultimately, Relay demonstrates that visual effects and CGI can be a storytelling tool rather than a spectacle. Practical effects provide tangible realism, while digital enhancements expand scale, deepen spatial awareness, and subtly reinforce themes of observation, mediation, and tension. The careful integration of both approaches ensures that the visual world feels cohesive, immersive, and alive. By blending tactile authenticity with invisible augmentation, the filmmakers create a world where every object, reflection, and digital extension contributes meaningfully to the story, heightening suspense, deepening character engagement, and reinforcing the film's intricate thematic architecture. The set design and locations in Relay are a masterclass in world-building, creating spaces that feel simultaneously functional, lived in, and narratively significant. From the very first moments, the environments establish the film's tone and immerse the audience in a world where precision, observation, and control dominate every action. The relay rooms themselves are meticulously detailed. Banks of monitors flicker in rhythm with key sequences, cables snake along floors and walls in organized chaos, and consoles hum with life, conveying the intensity and technical sophistication of the systems the characters navigate. These rooms are not mere backdrops. They're characters in their own right, shaping behavior, influencing pacing, and reinforcing narrative tension. Every knob, switch, and screen is carefully placed to make the procedural actions feel authentic, so when Ash interacts with the machinery, the audience senses the weight and stakes of his work. Beyond the relay rooms, the production design continues to impress. Office corridors, corporate atriums, industrial spaces, and urban exteriors all share a consistent visual language that balances realism with cinematic clarity. Narrow corridors with harsh fluorescent lighting create a sense of pressure and surveillance, while expansive, minimalist spaces amplify isolation and highlight systemic detachment. The filmmakers use spatial contrasts not only for aesthetic effect but to mirror internal character states. Compressed, cluttered environments communicate stress and urgency, whereas open, sterile spaces reflect detachment, authority, or emotional distance. Every hallway, stairwell, and corner becomes a deliberate choice that supports both narrative flow and psychological engagement. Props and small set details are treated with equal care. Communication devices, documents, digital interfaces, and environmental instruments are integrated organically into the spaces, functioning as extensions of the story rather than decorative set dressing. Even minor details, like the exact placement of a phone, the glow of a monitor reflecting across a character's face, or the precise angle of a printed document, carry narrative weight. These details establish continuity, reinforce procedural accuracy, and help the audience feel grounded in the reality of the story. Production designers clearly considered not just how the props look, but how they interact with character movements, camera angles, and narrative beats, creating an intricate, multi-layered environment. Color, texture, and lighting are carefully calibrated across all locations to reinforce mood and thematic resonance. Neutral, muted palettes dominate technical and corporate spaces, emphasizing sterility, control, and tension, while warmer tones appear sparingly in more personal or intimate locations, highlighting human connection or emotional vulnerability. Reflective surfaces, glass partitions, polished desks, mirrors, serve both aesthetic and thematic purposes, amplifying motifs of observation, mediated perception, and fragmented information. The way light interacts with these surfaces is deliberate, producing reflections and shadows that are visually striking while also advancing story and character insights. Outdoor and urban locations are equally intentional. Streets, parking lots, industrial areas, and exterior cityscapes are carefully framed and dressed to feel authentic, lived in, and narratively relevant. These external spaces provide contrast to the tightly controlled interiors, extending the world beyond the relay rooms and emphasizing the reach and complexity of the systems the characters inhabit. When digital enhancements are added to these environments, whether for scale, depth, or continuity, they blend seamlessly with physical locations, preserving immersion and reinforcing the film's realistic aesthetic. Spatial dynamics within sets are carefully orchestrated to influence narrative tension and character interaction. Doorways, walls, and furniture are arranged to guide movement, create visual tension, and manipulate sightlines. Long corridors, offset angles, and partially obstructed views not only enhance suspense, but reinforce the thematic preoccupations of observation, privacy, and control. Characters are constantly negotiating these spaces, sometimes literally, sometimes metaphorically, making the environments active participants in the story. Even transitional or minor locations, cafes, stairwells, lobbies, or corridors, are leveraged for narrative and emotional impact. The placement of furniture, lighting, and props in these spaces is never arbitrary. Each element influences how characters move, interact, or make moral and procedural decisions. A narrow stairwell can heighten claustrophobia, a dimly lit cafe can accentuate vulnerability, and a cluttered office can visually represent the complexity and pressure of a character's responsibilities. These subtle interventions demonstrate how thoughtful set design can amplify tension, emotion, and narrative stakes without overtly calling attention to itself. Production design also supports thematic and symbolic storytelling. The relay devices themselves are extensions of the narrative, representing both opportunity and constraint. Reflections, shadows, and light patterns reinforce ideas of surveillance, fragmented perception, and mediated reality. Even seemingly mundane elements like the layout of a control room, the position of monitors, or the angle of lighting carry symbolic significance, making the environment an active contributor to narrative meaning rather than just a stage for action. Ultimately, the sets and locations in Relay are fully integrated into every other aspect of the film: cinematography, editing, sound, and visual effects, creating a cohesive, immersive world. Practical design elements ground the story in reality. Digital augmentations extend scope and perspective, and careful attention to color, texture, lighting, and spatial dynamics reinforces both mood and theme. Every environment feels purposeful, alive, and narratively rich, allowing the audience to inhabit the world fully and experience the tension, stakes, and psychological complexity of the story in a way that feels immediate and authentic. The dialogue and script in Relay operate on multiple layers, functioning not only as a vehicle for plot but as a subtle instrument for character development, thematic resonance, and sustained narrative tension. Right from the beginning, the writing establishes a rhythm that reflects the high-pressure procedural world the characters inhabit. Exchanges are concise and purposeful, often punctuated by hesitations, pauses, and undercurrents of emotion. This approach creates a sense of realism that is rarely found in conventional thrillers. The conversations feel as though they could unfold in a real relay or command environment, where every word is measured and carries weight. The audience is immediately drawn into the operational world, understanding that dialogue is not just informational, it is consequential. One of the script's most impressive achievements is the way it integrates technical and procedural exposition naturally. Ash and Sarah, while navigating complex relay systems and surveillance networks, must explain or interpret information to each other, but the dialogue avoids feeling like an instructional manual. Lines that convey instructions, relay readings, or system updates are embedded in context, often accompanied by reactions, gestures, or subtle tension between characters. This technique ensures that the audience comprehends the stakes without breaking immersion, and it makes technical dialogue feel dynamic and character-driven rather than sterile or mechanical. The script's intelligence lies in its ability to weave narrative and exposition seamlessly, maintaining pacing while deepening engagement. Emotional resonance is another cornerstone of the writing. Moments of vulnerability, doubt, or moral deliberation are frequently expressed through minimal language, where subtext and delivery convey more than words themselves. For example, a single hesitant question from Ash can communicate anxiety, ethical conflict, or fear of failure, while a terse response from Sarah may reveal caution, determination, or mistrust. These understated exchanges allow the audience to inhabit the characters' internal states without relying on overt exposition. The script respects the intelligence of the viewer, trusting them to read nuance and respond emotionally to subtle cues embedded in dialogue. The script also employs wit and understated humor as a tool to humanize characters and relieve tension without diminishing stakes. These moments of levity are character-specific and arise naturally from their personalities or interactions. A dry quip from Ash or a sarcastic remark from Sarah often punctuates a high-stress situation, revealing relational dynamics and personality traits while enhancing engagement. Humor is rarely used for spectacle. Instead, it serves to make the characters feel authentic, providing a necessary counterbalance to the intense procedural tension and keeping the audience emotionally connected. Memorable lines in Relay often operate on multiple levels, simultaneously advancing plot, defining character, and reinforcing thematic concerns. A brief remark about protocol might highlight procedural tension, underscore a character's ethical orientation, or foreshadow narrative developments. The writing ensures that dialogue is rarely isolated from story or character. Even minor exchanges carry significance, whether advancing suspense, highlighting stakes, or illuminating relationships. By doing so, the script imbues everyday speech with latent weight, making conversations feel impactful even in quieter, seemingly mundane moments. Narrative pacing is reinforced through the rhythm and structure of dialogue. Exchanges are timed to match procedural beats, suspenseful sequences, and high-stakes decisions. Interruptions, overlaps, and measured pauses replicate the flow of real-world communication under pressure, creating tension that mirrors the relay operations themselves. The script's rhythm ensures the audience is consistently engaged. Rapid-fire lines heighten urgency, while slower, contemplative exchanges allow reflection on character motivations and ethical dilemmas. This interplay of tempo within dialogue maintains suspense while deepening the audience's understanding of the stakes. Subtext and layered meaning are central to the writing. Characters often speak in controlled, measured terms, but the subtext communicates fear, doubt, moral questioning, or relational tension. Lines that seem procedural on the surface frequently carry emotional or thematic undertones, prompting the audience to interpret meaning beyond words. Silence and pauses in dialogue are equally significant, creating tension, highlighting uncertainty, or emphasizing isolation. The script encourages active viewing, as understanding character intent requires attention to tone, timing, and nonverbal cues. Dialogue is also deeply integrated with environmental and situational cues. Characters respond organically to alarms, system readouts, machinery, or shifting conditions in real time. Conversations are not abstract but tied to physical and procedural context, making speech feel reactive, dynamic, and fully embedded in the story world. For instance, a warning from a monitor or a sudden environmental change can interrupt a discussion, forcing rapid decision-making and adding urgency. The interplay between dialogue and setting reinforces narrative immersion and emphasizes the procedural and psychological stakes. Additionally, the writing distinguishes between different character voices, giving each person a distinct rhythm, vocabulary, and emotional cadence. Ash speaks with measured precision, often emphasizing logical reasoning and technical accuracy, while Sarah balances caution with occasional assertiveness or moral reflection. Supporting characters are similarly differentiated, ensuring that dialogue remains dynamic and layered, with overlapping objectives, tensions, and emotional undercurrents. This attention to vocal texture strengthens character identity, enhances believability, and makes interactions more compelling and memorable. Ultimately, the dialogue and script in Relay are a carefully orchestrated system that serves multiple functions simultaneously. Every line, pause, and inflection contributes to character development, narrative propulsion, thematic reinforcement, and audience immersion. The writing balances technical exposition with emotional subtlety, procedural tension with human nuance, and sharp wit with ethical reflection. By blending realism, psychological depth, and narrative clarity, the script ensures that every conversation is purposeful, engaging, and memorable, making dialogue one of the film's most potent storytelling tools. Relay's genre execution is a finely tuned balancing act that stretches, subverts, and expands conventional thriller boundaries while keeping the audience fully engaged from start to finish. On the surface, it presents familiar genre markers: high-stakes operations, looming deadlines, and a world of surveillance and systemic control. However, the film's genius lies in how it reinterprets these tropes, avoiding cliches and prioritizing intellectual, procedural, and psychological tension over formulaic action sequences. From the opening scenes, the audience is immediately aware that the suspense will be driven not merely by explosions or confrontations, but by choices, strategy, and information flow. The film treats its thriller elements as a living system rather than a checklist of genre beats, and this approach establishes a level of sophistication that keeps viewers on edge without overwhelming them with spectacle. Suspense in Relay is meticulously layered, emerging from the operational mechanics of the relay system itself. Every decision, pressing a button, interpreting a feed, relaying information, carries weight, transforming mundane technical tasks into sources of tension. This procedural suspense subverts conventional expectations of thrillers, where tension often comes from external threats or physical danger. By anchoring suspense in cognitive and ethical stakes, the film elevates the genre, making viewers invest mentally as well as emotionally. Even seemingly quiet moments, such as analyzing a system anomaly or waiting for confirmation from another location, are imbued with palpable tension, proving that thrillers do not need to rely on constant action to maintain suspense. Action and drama are balanced with careful restraint. When physical confrontations or environmental hazards occur, they are integrated organically into the narrative rather than inserted for spectacle. Each action sequence has consequences and emerges logically from the character's choices, making the danger feel real and immediate. This adherence to plausibility intensifies emotional stakes. The audience feels the consequences alongside the characters, which enhances tension and deepens engagement. By limiting action to moments that genuinely advance plot or character, the film avoids genre fatigue and maintains a sense of credibility throughout. The film's humor and levity further distinguish its genre execution. In many thrillers, comic relief is often jarring or incongruous, but Relay integrates humor seamlessly through character dynamics and situational observation. A dry quip from Ash or a sardonic remark from Sarah in tense moments provides a humanizing counterpoint without diffusing suspense. These subtle inflections of wit serve multiple functions. They develop character, enhance relatability, and provide the audience with brief but meaningful relief from sustained tension. Humor becomes a tool to deepen engagement rather than a distraction, demonstrating the film's careful attention to tonal balance within its genre. Innovation in perspective and narrative structure also contributes to the film's genre mastery. Cross-cutting between multiple locations, monitoring feeds, and overlapping character perspectives creates a complex, multi-layered suspense. Viewers are given partial knowledge that mirrors the character's own uncertainty, generating dramatic irony and intensifying engagement. Unlike linear thrillers that reveal information sequentially, Relay plays with awareness and timing, creating anticipation and tension by letting the audience understand stakes that characters are only beginning to grasp. This structural sophistication elevates the procedural thriller into a more cerebral and immersive experience. Character-driven tension is another defining feature. Unlike conventional thrillers that often rely on archetypal hero versus villain structures, Relay emphasizes collaboration, negotiation, and moral ambiguity. Conflicts are as likely to emerge from ethical dilemmas, professional disagreements, or systemic constraints as from external threats. The interplay between personal motivation and procedural obligation creates a nuanced, dynamic tension that feels authentic to the world of the film. Character relationships are tested under pressure, revealing personality, loyalty, and vulnerability in ways that deepen both narrative and suspense. The film's visual language reinforces its genre in subtle yet powerful ways. Strategic lighting, muted color palettes, reflections, and shadow play contribute to a tense, atmospheric environment that amplifies suspense without resorting to overt genre signaling. Set design, props, and spatial layout further reinforce the thriller sensibility, ensuring that every frame communicates operational precision, psychological pressure, or environmental threat. These visual choices complement the narrative, blending seamlessly with dialogue, editing, and pacing to maintain the genre's tone consistently. Relay also pushes the boundaries of thriller conventions by embedding ethical and psychological dimensions into genre execution. Stakes are not only procedural but moral. Characters' decisions have consequences for themselves, colleagues, and the broader operational system. Suspense arises not just from risk of harm, but from the tension between professional obligation and personal integrity. This thematic layering enriches the genre, allowing the film to explore human behavior, trust, and decision-making under pressure, all while maintaining classic thriller tension. Finally, the film achieves a remarkable balance between familiarity and innovation. It honors core thriller and procedural conventions, urgency, high stakes, surveillance, and moral tension, while refreshing the genre through cerebral suspense, grounded action, character-driven dilemmas, and inventive narrative structure. The audience experiences a world that is thrilling, immersive, and emotionally resonant, where tension is built through intelligence, strategy, and ethical complexity as much as through external danger. Every sequence, from quiet procedural scenes to climactic confrontations, demonstrates meticulous genre control, making Relay a sophisticated and inventive addition to contemporary thrillers. Relay's social and cultural commentary is deeply interwoven into its narrative, functioning as a quiet but persistent undercurrent that amplifies both tension and thematic depth. The film goes beyond simply depicting high-stakes procedural operations to explore the ways contemporary systems, technological, institutional, and social, shape human behavior and influence ethical choices. By situating its story in a world dominated by relay systems, surveillance, and information control, Relay prompts viewers to consider the broader implications of living in a society where technology mediates almost every interaction. This exploration feels organic because it emerges naturally from plot developments, character decisions, and the high-stakes operational environment, rather than being tacked on as external commentary. One of the most compelling aspects of the film's social observation is its focus on surveillance and the ethical dilemmas associated with monitoring, analyzing, and acting on information. The relay system is depicted as a powerful tool that can protect or endanger, depending on how it is used. Characters must constantly navigate the tension between efficiency, accuracy, and morality, raising questions about accountability, transparency, and the consequences of oversight. Through these scenarios, Relay reflects contemporary anxieties about digital surveillance, privacy, and the moral responsibilities of those who control information. The ethical quandaries faced by Ash, Sarah, and the supporting cast mirror real-world dilemmas, inviting the audience to reflect on the human cost of technologically mediated oversight. The film also examines the psychological and social impact of working within tightly controlled, high-pressure systems. Characters are frequently constrained by protocol, hierarchy, and systemic expectation, creating a tension between personal ethics and institutional compliance. This dynamic mirrors modern professional environments, where employees often balance efficiency and output against personal values and social responsibility. Moments of hesitation, conflict, or moral decision-making highlight the stress, isolation, and emotional burden inherent in such roles, providing insight into the human dimension of systemic pressures. By portraying these challenges authentically, Relay extends its thriller narrative into a socially relevant meditation on modern work culture and the demands of operating within complex systems. Ethical ambiguity is a recurring theme, explored not through exposition but through character action and consequence. Decisions made in moments of crisis, whether to relay critical information, prioritize procedure over empathy, or act independently of protocol, underscore the film's engagement with moral complexity. These dilemmas are never presented as binary choices, but as nuanced scenarios where each option carries potential risk and reward. This emphasis on ethical negotiation enriches the social commentary, encouraging viewers to consider the subtle trade-offs and responsibilities inherent in navigating bureaucratic, technological, or hierarchical systems. Communication, miscommunication, and the limits of human connection within technologically mediated spaces are also central to the film's cultural critique. The relay system, while enabling oversight and coordination, also introduces distance, distortion, and potential misinterpretation. Characters must rely on screens, feeds, and indirect signals, highlighting the fragility of human connection in a world dominated by systems. The film thus comments on contemporary challenges posed by remote communication, digital mediation, and organizational dependence on technology, showing how reliance on systems can both empower and isolate. Relationships are tested not only by operational stress, but by the limitations of mediated interaction, making the stakes psychologically and socially compelling. Relay further interrogates institutional power and hierarchy, portraying organizations as simultaneously efficient, necessary, and constraining. Characters' struggles to reconcile personal judgment with institutional expectation serve as commentary on the balance between individual autonomy and systemic control. These dynamics reflect broader societal concerns about authority, governance, and the tension between collective responsibility and personal morality. The film emphasizes that systemic power is not inherently malevolent but requires ethical navigation, demonstrating that complex social structures demand constant negotiation between human values and operational necessity. Cultural norms, expectations, and social pressures subtly permeate character behavior and plot development. Decisions regarding authority, risk, and loyalty reveal underlying societal assumptions about duty, accountability, and moral responsibility. By embedding these reflections within dialogue, action, and visual storytelling, the film invites the audience to consider how social context shapes ethical decision-making without disrupting narrative flow. Ethical and social stakes are never separated from procedural tension. They are fully integrated into the world of the film, making commentary feel immersive rather than didactic. Sensitive and complex topics, including privacy, oversight, and moral responsibility, are handled with nuance and care. Relay does not offer simplistic answers. Instead, it presents layered scenarios that encourage reflection. The audience is prompted to engage actively with multiple perspectives, weighing the consequences of action or inaction and considering the ethical ramifications of the character's choices. By embedding social critique within the suspenseful procedural narrative, the film avoids moralizing, allowing contemplation to arise naturally from plot, character interaction, and operational tension. Visual storytelling reinforces these themes throughout the film. The sterile, meticulously organized relay rooms, banks of monitors, and controlled spatial layouts serve as metaphors for systemic oversight and technological mediation of human behavior. Reflections, shadows, and framing reinforce ideas of observation, accountability, and moral scrutiny. Even small environmental details, such as the positioning of monitors, the glow of screens across characters' faces, or the tension in a hallway conversation, communicate underlying social and ethical pressures. The production design, cinematography, and staging work in concert with dialogue and narrative to underscore the cultural and social commentary subtly but powerfully. By intertwining character, narrative, and visual elements, Relay creates a multi-layered commentary on contemporary society, technology, and ethics. Surveillance, systemic pressure, ethical ambiguity, and mediated human connection are explored not as abstract concepts, but as lived experiences within the story world. This integration ensures that social and cultural themes enhance immersion and narrative engagement rather than feeling extraneous. The film encourages viewers to reflect on their own interactions with technology, authority, and ethical responsibility, making its commentary both relevant and resonant. Relay's mastery of audience engagement operates on an intricate web of narrative, character, thematic, and sensory dimensions, creating a cinematic experience that is immersive, emotionally resonant, and intellectually stimulating from start to finish. The film begins by immediately establishing stakes that are simultaneously procedural, ethical, and personal, ensuring that viewers are invested not just in what happens, but in how it happens and why. Unlike thrillers that rely purely on spectacle, Relay generates engagement through anticipation, problem-solving, and empathy. From the opening scenes, audiences are invited into a world where every decision, pressing a button, relaying a signal, or interpreting a monitor, carries potential consequences that could ripple across the narrative. This immersive approach transforms viewers into active participants, mentally and emotionally navigating the relay system alongside the characters. The film's characters are a core driver of engagement. Ash and Sarah, as primary figures, are carefully layered with motivations, vulnerabilities, and strengths that feel authentic and relatable. The audience experiences their anxieties, doubts, and triumphs in real time, forming emotional attachments that make procedural developments and ethical dilemmas deeply compelling. Supporting characters, though less prominent, are similarly nuanced, adding texture to interpersonal dynamics and reinforcing the stakes of collaboration, trust, and professional responsibility. By grounding the tension in human emotion as well as operational precision, the film ensures that every suspenseful moment is imbued with personal resonance. Viewers are not just watching operations unfold, they are emotionally invested in the outcomes and the moral consequences of the characters' choices. Suspense and anticipation are expertly calibrated throughout the film. Relay frequently employs partial information, cross-cutting between multiple stations, monitoring feeds, and character perspectives, creating layered tension that keeps the audience mentally engaged. This approach mirrors the character's own experience of incomplete knowledge, requiring viewers to synthesize clues, anticipate outcomes, and consider the ramifications of each choice. Unexpected twists and complications, system failures, ethical dilemmas, or human error heighten excitement and shock, ensuring that attention never wavers. The suspense is cerebral as well as visceral. The audience is challenged to think, anticipate, and emotionally respond in real time, making the procedural thriller experience interactive and immersive. Emotional resonance is further enhanced through subtle dramatic beats and human moments. The film avoids over-the-top melodrama, instead opting for quiet tension, interpersonal nuance, and understated displays of vulnerability or courage. A hesitation before sending critical information, a small act of bravery, or a moment of ethical reflection can carry more weight than an action set piece because the audience has been primed to care deeply about the characters and their decisions. Humor and levity are sprinkled strategically throughout, often emerging naturally from character interactions or situational irony. This calibrated lightness provides relief, reinforces character depth, and makes suspenseful moments feel even more intense by contrast. Intellectual engagement is another layer of the film's audience resonance. Ethical dilemmas, moral ambiguity, and systemic constraints invite viewers to reflect on what they would do in similar situations. Questions about personal responsibility, adherence to protocol versus moral imperatives, and the consequences of action or inaction are embedded in the narrative. By presenting these dilemmas organically within the plot and character arcs, the film encourages reflection and discussion without ever becoming didactic. The audience is asked to consider not just who succeeds or fails, but why and what ethical or social lessons emerge from their choices. Cultural and societal relevance heightens engagement further. Themes of technological mediation, surveillance, and the human cost of systemic control resonate with contemporary audiences. The film encourages reflection on how technology, hierarchy, and institutional pressures shape decision-making, communication, and human interaction in the real world. By embedding these observations within narrative tension and character experiences, Relay creates engagement that extends beyond the immediate cinematic experience, prompting post-viewing discussion, debate, and contemplation. Visual and auditory storytelling play a key role in maximizing engagement. Cinematography, lighting, set design, and framing immerse viewers in the Relay environment, emphasizing procedural precision, operational tension, and moral stakes. Editing choices, timed cuts, cross-cutting, and overlapping sequences enhance suspense, while sound design, ambient noise, and musical cues amplify emotional and cognitive investment. The interplay between sensory input and narrative stakes ensures that viewers are not merely observing but feeling the pressures, urgency, and nuances of the Relay world. The film also encourages repeat viewings by embedding subtle foreshadowing, layered dialogue, and intricate procedural detail that reward careful attention. Moments that initially seem minor gain significance upon reflection or subsequent watches, enhancing engagement and deepening appreciation for the narrative's complexity. Even quieter sequences, filled with procedural or relational nuance, invite analysis and discussion, demonstrating the film's layered craftsmanship. Furthermore, audience engagement is sustained by the film's rhythm and pacing. The alternation between high-stakes procedural sequences, quiet reflective moments, ethical deliberations, and interpersonal interactions creates a dynamic emotional arc viewers are given room to breathe, anticipate, and analyze, which makes peaks of tension and emotional release more impactful. This careful orchestration of pacing ensures that engagement is maintained consistently, rather than relying solely on action or spectacle to hold attention. Ultimately, Relay achieves audience engagement through a sophisticated combination of narrative tension, character depth, moral complexity, intellectual challenge, and sensory immersion. It invites viewers to participate mentally and emotionally, encourages reflection and discussion, and balances suspense, humor, and ethical stakes in a way that feels organic and compelling. Every choice, from character development to visual framing, procedural design to ethical quandaries, is engineered to maximize emotional resonance, cognitive involvement, and long-term impact. When comparing Relay to other films in the thriller and procedural genre, it becomes immediately apparent that it occupies a unique space while still drawing on familiar elements that fans of suspense cinema will recognize and appreciate. Many thrillers rely heavily on external action, chases, shootouts, and explosive set pieces to generate tension, often at the expense of character depth or procedural realism. Relay, by contrast, builds suspense almost entirely through systems, decisions, and moral dilemmas, making it feel more cerebral and methodical. In this way, it aligns somewhat with films like Enemy of the State or Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which focus on information, observation, and the ethical weight of choices, but Relay distinguishes itself by integrating high-stakes procedural systems as a narrative engine rather than a backdrop. Compared to classic thrillers, Relay offers a refreshing balance of tension, drama, and reflection. Where films like Mission, Impossible, or The Bourne Identity lean on kinetic energy and action choreography to maintain engagement, Relay achieves similar levels of suspense through careful pacing, strategic editing, and a focus on intellectual and ethical stakes. The tension is built in quieter spaces, the Relay rooms, monitoring stations, or communications hubs, where every minor choice has significant consequences. This procedural precision makes the suspense feel earned and immersive, contrasting with thrillers that rely on rapid spectacle or over-the-top sequences. Within the context of the director's previous work, Relay represents both a continuation and an evolution. If the director is known for character-driven thrillers, the film continues that legacy, but expands it by embedding the narrative within intricate systems and operational constraints. Compared to earlier works that might focus more on interpersonal conflict or linear narrative tension, Relay experiments with multi-perspective storytelling, partial information, and ethical ambiguity, offering a more layered and intellectually engaging experience. The director's signature visual style, careful framing, muted palettes, and strategic lighting is present here but applied in a way that reinforces procedural tension and systemic complexity, making the familiar stylistic approach feel fresh and purposeful. In terms of narrative structure and pacing, Relay also stands out among genre peers. Many thrillers follow a conventional three-act formula: setup, escalating conflict, and climactic resolution. Relay honors the structure at a macro level but plays creatively within it, cross-cutting between locations, overlapping perspectives, and incorporating micro-stakes that build cumulatively. The film subverts the expectation that tension must always be external or action-driven. Instead, intellectual, procedural, and ethical pressures generate a suspense that feels constant, immersive, and consequential. This differentiates Relay from formulaic entries in its genre, positioning it as a thriller that rewards patience, attention, and moral reflection. Looking at similar films in terms of technological and systemic tension, Relay shares thematic space with movies like Contagion, Snowden, or Minority Report, where institutional systems and technology create both opportunities and risks. Unlike these films, which sometimes focus primarily on societal implications or external crises, Relay maintains a tight focus on human interaction within the system itself. The procedural mechanics are not just a narrative device, they are the source of conflict, suspense, and character development. This makes the film feel both contemporary and innovative, expanding the genre's potential by showing how systemic tension can drive narrative and emotional engagement as effectively as action or spectacle. In comparison to other character-driven thrillers, Relay excels at balancing multiple dimensions simultaneously. Unlike films that prioritize moral questions at the expense of procedural clarity, or thrillers that favor intricate systems but neglect emotional stakes, Relay integrates both seamlessly. The audience experiences ethical ambiguity, procedural complexity, and personal tension in tandem, making the stakes multidimensional. This holistic approach ensures that suspense is not only plot-driven but character-anchored, creating a richer and more rewarding experience than many genre peers. Furthermore, Relay's humor and relational nuance set it apart from darker, more austere thrillers. While many procedural or spy thrillers maintain relentlessly grim tone, Relay allows for moments of levity and human connection, enhancing audience attachment and providing relief that makes dramatic peaks more impactful. This tonal balance differentiates it from more conventional or rigid entries in its category, creating a unique viewing rhythm that engages both intellect and emotion. Finally, when evaluating its originality within its genre, Relay both honors and expands expectations. It follows familiar thriller conventions, tension, stakes, ethical dilemmas, but executes them through inventive structural techniques, multi-layered procedural systems, and nuanced character arcs. Compared to franchise entries or genre staples, it offers fresh narrative mechanics, a cerebral approach to suspense, and a morally complex story world that encourages reflection as well as entertainment. The result is a film that feels familiar enough to satisfy genre enthusiasts, but distinctive enough to stand out as innovative and thoughtfully crafted. Relay's use of symbolism and metaphor is so intricately layered that nearly every visual, auditory, and narrative choice contributes to a deeper understanding of the film's themes and character arcs, transforming what might appear as a procedural thriller into a rich, almost allegorical experience. The relay system, central to the plot, functions on multiple symbolic levels. Practically, it is the mechanism by which characters communicate, monitor, and control events. Metaphorically, it represents the interconnectedness of human action and consequence, the invisible threads that bind decisions to outcomes, and the constant tension between control and uncertainty. Every signal transmitted, every delay, and every miscommunication serves as a visual and narrative metaphor for ethical responsibility, illustrating how even the smallest human action, or inaction, can have ripple effects that alter lives. The film's visual design is saturated with symbolism. Monitors, reflections, and screens frequently frame characters in ways that convey themes of observation, surveillance, and moral scrutiny. Ash or Sarah appearing multiplied across reflections or screen grids visually emphasizes the idea that their actions are constantly watched and evaluated, not just by the system but by themselves, creating an ongoing dialogue between self-perception, accountability, and ethical responsibility. This motif extends beyond individual characters. The environment itself acts as a mirror of systemic tension, a symbolic landscape in which human agency is both empowered and constrained. The recurring presence of glass, screens, and reflective surfaces reinforces the film's meditation on transparency, perception, and the moral weight of observation. Colors and lighting reinforce symbolic meaning in subtle but powerful ways. The sterile blues, grays, and cold whites of relay and control room symbolize precision, detachment, and analytic rigor, yet they also convey isolation and emotional constraint. Warm hues appear in moments of moral choice, personal reflection, or interpersonal connection, signaling the human element struggling against mechanized, procedural environments. Shadows and muted lighting often obscure faces or objects during critical ethical decisions, visually symbolizing ambiguity, hidden motives, and moral uncertainty. These visual cues serve not only to heighten suspense, but also to reinforce the thematic tension between institutional order and individual conscience. Recurring motifs, clocks, timers, and digital readouts function symbolically as markers of temporal and ethical pressure. They remind viewers that choices are bound by time, that hesitation or error carries consequences, and that ethical responsibility is always constrained by the relentless forward march of events. These motifs also intersect with human gestures and reactions, creating a visual and thematic juxtaposition between mechanical inevitability and human imperfection, underscoring the fragility and weight of moral decision-making under pressure. Dialogue and language are rich with metaphorical resonance. Operational terminology such as relay, signal, transmit, or feed is often mirrored in discussions about trust, morality, and responsibility. Commands that seem purely technical echo ethical weight, reminding the audience that systems are extensions of human choice. Even casual dialogue occasionally carries double meaning. A line about cross-checking data or monitoring progress may also reference the necessity of ethical vigilance, the monitoring of one's own conscience, or the consequences of human error. This layering of operational and moral language deepens both narrative engagement and thematic resonance. Spatial design is another key vehicle for metaphor. Relay rooms, corridors, and monitoring hubs are simultaneously protective and confining. They are carefully designed to suggest order, oversight, and operational efficiency, yet they also symbolize the constraints and pressures imposed by institutional structures. Characters navigating these spaces physically and metaphorically negotiate boundaries between compliance, personal ethics, and moral autonomy. The spatial metaphor extends to visual framing. Characters are often placed in boxed or segmented frames, reinforcing ideas of containment, observation, and ethical constraint, while movement within these frames reflects negotiation, struggle, or agency within systemic limits. Silence and absence are employed as symbolic devices to accentuate moral, emotional, or procedural tension. Quiet sequences, devoid of dialogue or ambient noise, signal introspection, ethical deliberation, or heightened suspense. These silences amplify the audience's awareness of stakes and mirror the isolation of the characters, transforming procedural observation into a meditation on responsibility, choice, and consequence. Similarly, gaps in information, incomplete feeds, or missing data are not just plot devices. They symbolize ambiguity, uncertainty, and the impossibility of omniscience, reminding the audience that human perception and understanding are always limited. Props and small recurring visual elements carry layered symbolic meaning. Notebooks, communication devices, markers, and monitors serve dual roles. They are functional within the narrative, yet they also represent the tangible impact of human decision-making on abstract systems. A single mark on a screen, a note jotted in a ledger, or a signal transmitted carries narrative weight as well as metaphorical significance, emphasizing that even minor actions resonate across personal, ethical, and systemic dimensions. The narrative structure itself functions metaphorically. Cross-cutting between perspectives, overlapping sequences, and partial reveals reflect the complexity of moral and systemic environments. The audience experiences the same uncertainty and limited knowledge as the characters, making suspense and ethical tension simultaneously intellectual and emotional. This structural symbolism reinforces the film's core idea that human understanding is partial, decisions carry unforeseen consequences, and ethical navigation is fraught with ambiguity. Even interpersonal interactions are imbued with symbolic weight. Conflicted conversations, moments of trust or betrayal, and collaborative problem-solving reflect broader themes of human interdependence, ethical negotiation, and the negotiation between personal values and systemic pressures. The interplay between procedural mechanics and human relationships is metaphorical in itself. It suggests that human systems, whether technological, institutional, or social, are extensions of moral and emotional networks, and that ethical awareness must accompany technical expertise for systems to function justly. In sum, relay symbolism and metaphors operate on every level: visual, auditory, spatial, linguistic, and structural, creating a rich, interconnected tapestry of meaning. Each choice, from lighting and color to dialogue and narrative structure, reinforces the film's thematic preoccupations, moral ambiguity, systemic pressure, ethical responsibility, and the delicate balance between human agency and institutional control. These layers invite interpretation, reflection, and repeat viewing, rewarding audiences who engage closely with the film's visual and narrative language while enhancing suspense, character development, and thematic depth. Relay's place within a broader cinematic and historical context can be explored in far greater depth, revealing how it both honors and innovates on traditions in procedural, thriller, and morally complex storytelling. While it is not part of an established franchise, Relay can be understood as a modern extension of several historical threads in cinema, blending systemic suspense, ethical inquiry, and character-driven tension in a way that situates it within both genre evolution and cultural commentary. Looking at procedural and systems-focused cinema historically, Relay draws from decades of films that emphasize human interaction with complex structures, whether technological, institutional, or social. Early films like War Games, 1983, and The China Syndrome, 1979, introduced audiences to high-stakes systems under pressure, where errors or ethical lapses could have catastrophic consequences. These films relied heavily on technological intrigue and moral dilemmas, but often framed them within the spectacle or crises of the era, such as nuclear threats or industrial disasters. Relay updates these ideas for a contemporary audience, embedding ethical and procedural tension in near-future or current technological frameworks. The stakes are no less severe, but the pressure is internalized. The danger arises from decision-making within interconnected systems, rather than from purely external threats. This evolution highlights how thriller cinema has shifted from external spectacle to internalized, procedural suspense. The film also engages with the lineage of intelligence and espionage thrillers, which historically emphasize secrecy, layered perspectives, and moral ambiguity. Films like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, 2011, or The Conversation, 1974, focus on observation, miscommunication, and the moral weight of surveillance and decision-making. Relay aligns with this tradition but innovates by combining procedural operations with real-time, ethical tension. Cross-cutting between stations, overlapping character perspectives, and incomplete information immerse the audience in both cognitive and emotional suspense. Whereas earlier films of this type often concentrated on national or global stakes, Relay narrows the lens to the human and procedural level, demonstrating how systemic operations can create high-pressure moral and operational dilemmas in smaller, more intimate contexts. In terms of thematic and cultural history, Relay reflects the contemporary fascination with technology, networks, and accountability. Modern audiences are increasingly attuned to questions of privacy, surveillance, algorithmic influence, and human responsibility in interconnected systems. The film situates itself in this historical moment, using realistic operational mechanics and ethical dilemmas to explore issues that resonate with current cultural anxieties. Unlike historical thrillers that depicted technology as a largely external force or threat, Relay integrates technological systems into the moral and narrative fabric, emphasizing that systems are shaped by human choices, oversight, and ethical awareness. The historical evolution of moral ambiguity in cinema is also evident in Relay's design. Classical thrillers often resolved narrative and ethical tension with clear resolutions. Heroes succeeded, villains were defeated, and moral clarity was restored. Modern cinema, however, increasingly embraces ambiguity and complexity, presenting outcomes that reflect the uncertainty of real life. Relay exemplifies this trend by maintaining ethical and operational tension throughout its narrative. Characters make choices that are never entirely right or wrong, and the consequences ripple in unpredictable ways, reflecting a historical shift toward morally complex storytelling that challenges audiences to interpret, analyze, and reflect. From a visual and production standpoint, Relay demonstrates a historical awareness of cinematic realism and immersive design. Its sets, props, lighting, and camera work evoke the verisimilitude of institutional and technological environments, grounding the suspense in a believable and historically informed world. Control rooms, monitoring stations, and operational layouts are carefully crafted to reflect both functional realism and symbolic meaning, echoing historical films where production design reinforced narrative tension and thematic resonance. Even minor visual details, markers on screens, procedural checklists, or the spatial arrangement of monitors tie into both historical cinematic traditions and modern expectations for authenticity. Narratively, Relay innovates within historical precedent by merging procedural mechanics with multi-perspective storytelling. Earlier system-focused films often adhere to linear narratives, gradually revealing stakes to both characters and audience. Relay complicates this by using overlapping timelines, partial knowledge, and cross-cutting sequences that mirror the uncertainty faced by characters in real time. This historical evolution of narrative complexity allows the audience to experience suspense cognitively and emotionally, creating engagement through problem-solving, ethical reflection, and anticipation. It situates the film in a lineage that values cerebral and moral stakes as much as action, demonstrating the genre's adaptability over time. Relay's historical context also includes its potential to establish a conceptual franchise. While the film is standalone, its attention to procedural intricacy, ethical stakes, and system-based tension creates a narrative universe capable of expansion. Future films could explore different operational environments, ethical dilemmas, or character perspectives, maintaining thematic and procedural continuity. This positions Relay not only within the evolution of thriller cinema, but also within a contemporary cinematic trend of creating richly detailed, expandable worlds that prioritize both story and systemic plausibility over mere spectacle. Finally, Relay's engagement with historical and cultural context ensures that it resonates with contemporary audiences while honoring cinematic traditions. Its meticulous procedural realism, layered moral dilemmas, and immersive operational design reflect the evolution of thrillers from external, action-driven spectacles to internal, morally complex narratives. By situating suspense within systems, emphasizing ethical responsibility, and foregrounding human choice, the film contributes meaningfully to both genre and cultural history, offering a modern perspective on long-standing cinematic preoccupations with tension, morality, and consequence. Relay's budget and box office story offer a fascinating case study in how a mid-range thriller can achieve high production quality and meaningful audience impact without blockbuster-level financing. Unlike films in the superhero or action-adventure category, which often dedicate the lion's share of their budgets to CGI-heavy sequences, global locations, and star-studded salaries, Relay's financial resources were carefully distributed to maximize immersion, realism, and narrative tension. Every production decision, from set construction to camera placement, practical effects, sound design, and post-production color grading, reflects a deliberate allocation of budget toward elements that directly enhance the viewer's experience. For example, the relay stations and control rooms are rendered with meticulous attention to detail, with screens, data interfaces, and props that are not only visually convincing but narratively functional, giving audiences the sense of being inside a fully operational system. The film's moderate budget allowed for creative risk-taking in ways that big-budget films sometimes cannot afford. Without the pressure to generate massive opening weekend returns through spectacle alone, the filmmakers invested in layered storytelling, complex character development, and subtle visual and auditory cues that heighten suspense. Lighting, color palettes, and shadow design are used strategically to evoke both tension and ethical ambiguity, demonstrating that smart design choices can significantly elevate production value without extravagant spending. Even sequences that involve multiple characters operating in high-pressure relay scenarios are shot in ways that maximize suspense while remaining cost-efficient, relying on composition, pacing, and sound design rather than expensive action choreography or visual effects. Box office results for Relay reflect the intersection of budget management, audience targeting, and critical reception. While the film may not have broken records against blockbuster franchises, its financial performance should be viewed in context. Mid-budget thrillers rarely compete on sheer spectacle, and success is often measured by long-term engagement, streaming rentals, and word-of-mouth rather than immediate box office dominance. In Relay's case, careful marketing that highlighted its cerebral suspense, procedural accuracy, and ethical dilemmas attracted a core audience of thriller enthusiasts and fans of system-driven narratives. These viewers appreciated the film's attention to realism, moral complexity, and narrative sophistication, which contributed to steady and consistent box office returns and streaming performance over time. Marketing strategy played a significant role in shaping financial outcomes. Campaigns focused on the film's intellectual and narrative strengths, emphasizing suspense, ethical tension, and character-driven stakes rather than over-the-top visual spectacle. Teasers and trailers highlighted the relay systems, high-stakes decision-making, and morally ambiguous scenarios, giving audiences a clear sense of what to expect while appealing to those who favor procedural and cerebral thrillers. This approach may have limited the film's appeal to casual moviegoers looking for blockbuster action, but it strengthened resonance with a target demographic, ensuring a reliable financial return relative to the production budget. Another factor affecting box office and financial success is audience perception of value. Relay's production quality often exceeded expectations for its budget range, giving viewers a sense that they were watching a high-caliber thriller comparable to larger-scale productions. This perception of value likely influenced repeat viewings, positive word of mouth, and strong performance on digital platforms. The film's meticulous design, spanning sets, lighting, sound, visual cues, and narrative coherence, made it feel bigger and more immersive than the numbers alone might suggest, reinforcing the idea that strategic budgeting and careful production planning can yield results competitive with higher-cost films. Furthermore, the timing of Relay's release relative to other films impacted its box office trajectory. Positioned amidst a crowded slate of action-packed franchise releases, the film carved a niche by emphasizing intelligence, suspense, and procedural depth over spectacle. This allowed it to stand out for audiences seeking a more cerebral and morally complex thriller. While its theatrical footprint may have been modest compared to mass-market blockbusters, its performance on streaming and digital rental platforms was bolstered by targeted marketing, critical praise, and social media discussion highlighting its unique procedural and ethical approach. Finally, analyzing production versus budget allocation provides insight into how Relay achieved high-quality results efficiently. Major costs were directed toward critical visual and auditory elements, the design and construction of realistic relay stations, high-resolution camera equipment, precise lighting setups, layered sound mixing, and the creation of a tension-building musical score. Post-production editing and color grading were also executed with precision, ensuring narrative clarity, consistent pacing, and visual cohesion. By prioritizing these areas, the filmmakers maximized the perceived value of the budget while maintaining creative freedom and narrative integrity, demonstrating how mid-range films can achieve both critical and financial success through strategic investment. In conclusion, Relay's budget and box office story illustrates that a moderate financial investment, when allocated strategically, can yield a film with high production quality, immersive world building, and sustained audience engagement. Its financial performance, strengthened by positive word of mouth, focused marketing, and a dedicated niche audience, reflects a modern model of mid-budget success in the thriller genre. The film's ability to balance production ambition with careful budgeting and strategic marketing demonstrates that thoughtful resource management can create a cinematic experience that feels both sophisticated and financially viable. Relay is a film that really rewards audiences who seek a fully immersive viewing experience, and the way you choose to watch it can dramatically influence how much you enjoy the tension, procedural intricacy, and ethical nuance embedded throughout the story. For the fullest impact, theaters are an ideal option, especially if you have access to a screen that allows for detailed visuals, precise lighting, and layered sound to come through. Watching the film in a theater heightens the sense of immediacy, particularly in sequences where multiple relay stations, monitors, and high-stakes decisions unfold simultaneously. The controlled environment, surround sound, and darkened space allow every subtle visual cue, audio signal, and character reaction to land fully, creating a heightened sense of suspense and immersion. For those who may not have immediate access to theaters or prefer the convenience of home viewing, streaming platforms offer an excellent alternative. Relay's cinematography, set design, and sound design translate very well to high-definition and 4K streaming, allowing audiences to catch the meticulous detail of relay stations, monitor layouts, and reflective surfaces that reinforce narrative tension. A high-quality home sound system or headphones are recommended for streaming, as the film's layered score, ambient sounds, and subtle audio cues play a critical role in building suspense and emotional resonance. Pausing, replaying, or closely observing sequences is easier in streaming formats, which can enhance appreciation for the film's careful construction and procedural complexity. Digital rental platforms provide yet another way to experience the film at your own pace, giving viewers control over timing, repeated viewings, and attention to detail. Relay's narrative is layered, with overlapping sequences, partial knowledge, and ethical ambiguity, so being able to pause and review critical scenes can deepen understanding and engagement. Digital rentals also make it possible to watch with a small group of friends or family, facilitating discussions about ethical decisions, character motivations, and procedural strategy that are central to the film's experience. Sharing reactions in real time with others can replicate some of the suspense and communal engagement found in theaters while allowing for reflection and analysis afterward. Television broadcasts or satellite channels may eventually offer relay to a broader audience, though the theatrical and streaming experiences remain the most effective for absorbing the full impact of the film. On television, larger screens with high-definition displays allow audiences to notice fine details in set design, monitor readouts, and character interactions that are central to the story. Attention to sound quality remains important, as the film relies on subtle auditory cues to build tension and highlight procedural and ethical stakes. Ultimately, the choice of platform affects how audiences engage with relay. Watching in theaters maximizes immersion, suspense, and communal energy. Streaming platforms provide flexibility, high-definition detail, and focused engagement, and digital rentals allow for repeated viewing and deeper reflection on complex narrative and ethical elements. For viewers who want to experience the procedural tension, moral ambiguity, and meticulous world-building in the way the filmmakers intended, combining multiple viewing methods can be particularly rewarding. Seeing it first in theaters to feel the immediacy, then revisiting key sequences via streaming or digital rental to fully appreciate the layer design, symbolic details, and intricate character decisions that make Relay a standout modern thriller.